There are things you can't forget, even if you want to. I'm too old now to pretend that time healed everything. Some pain doesn't heal. It just settles inside so it doesn't get in the way so much. But there's one that never settled. There's one memory that visits me every midnight. My sister's cry. It was sharp, painful. It seemed to tear through the silence of the night. That was the last sound I ever heard from her. I never saw her again. I never held her again. I was just a boy and she, even younger. But I remember the tight hug that night, as if she already knew it was the end. Since then, I've carried the weight of not having done anything. Life went on. The days passed, but her cry stayed locked inside me. Sometimes I tell this story to myself so I don't forget her face, the smell of her hair, her tired voice. Today, I tell it to you, not to ask for pity, not to spread sadness. I just don't want her to be forgotten. If this story touches your heart, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and stay here with me until the end. To know how this story ends, before the world became such a cold place, I still believed that life had a few safe corners. They were few, almost nothing, but they existed. One of them was my sister's embrace. Even though she was small, she had a way of making me forget. We lived surrounded by invisible chains. We protected each other the best we could, like two little birds trying to hide from the storm. I remember the smell of her skin, the way she smiled even after a whole day of exhaustion, the way she held me in her arms to help me sleep when the shouting outside wouldn't let us rest. She was younger, but seemed older. She had a kind of courage that couldn't fit inside her thin little body. Sometimes, when everything hurt so much, she'd just look at me, press her forehead against mine, and whisper, "I'm here." And that was enough. Even if we were falling apart inside, that moment was enough. We grew up in a place where being a child was a risk. Any trace of innocence was ripped away as if the world wanted to harden us before our time. But we insisted on building our own hiding places. There was a spot behind the big kitchen where the sunlight hit in a different way. When we could, we slipped back there, sat on the dirt floor, and pretended we were somewhere else. I told her stories. I made up worlds where we had a mother and father, where we ran free in the woods without fear of anyone. She closed her eyes and listened in silence. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she cried. We even shared silence. We split the last piece of cassava like it was a feast, and even hungry, even scared, she always gave me the bigger piece. I asked why, and she said, "Because you dreamed for both of us." Those words never left my mind. My sister dreamed awake with me. She believed in the worlds I made up like they were real. Maybe because they were all we had. At night, when the sky was full of stars and the sounds of the night seemed to swallow everything, she leaned against me and held my hand tightly. She said that as long as we were together, no one could take us from each other. It was a lie, but we believed it. We had to believe, or we'd go mad. I remember one day more clearly than the others. She woke up before me and left a piece of fruit by my head. When I opened my eyes, she was looking at me with that quiet smile only she knew how to make. I felt a peace I never felt again after that. That was the last day everything was still whole. After that came the whispers, the strange looks, the visits from men who came and went without saying anything. We knew something was coming, even if we didn't understand what. I got quieter, and so did she. Our games turned into silence, and our little spot behind the kitchen didn't feel safe anymore. Still, she kept making me smile. One day, she gave me a piece of colored cloth, saying it was to keep in my pocket, to protect me from nightmares. I still have it. It's old, torn, almost colorless, but I don't let anyone touch it. It was hers. It was her way of protecting me when she was no longer around. I didn't know it then, but that was her way of saying goodbye before it was time. We lived in a time when no one asked what we felt. Children weren't allowed to cry or to get attached, but we did against everything, against everyone. Every time she got sick, I stayed up all night, fanning her with my hands, trying to bring down her fever with wet cloths. Every time I got hurt, she tore her own dress to bandage me. We took care of each other like old people, like love was the only medicine we had. And maybe it was. I don't remember our mother. I don't know if we had one, but I remember my sister taking care of me like she was all I had, and she was. I had nothing but her, and that was enough. On good days, we laughed softly. She made up songs with words only we understood. On bad days, we held each other tight until sleep took us. And when I woke up, the first thing I did was look for her face, if she was there. The world hadn't ended yet until one day, her face wasn't there anymore, and everything that came after, well, that's another part of the story. It was early morning when I saw them coming. I had never seen those men before. They were coats defined for the heat, hats pulled low, and eyes that didn't blink enough. They didn't speak much, just pointed, whispered, and walked like they owned everything under their boots. I didn't know their names. I didn't want to, but I remember their smell, something like leather mixed with something rotten. My sister felt it before I did. She always did. We were crouched by the fire pit, scraping what little was left of breakfast when she suddenly froze. Her hand tightened around mine. "Don't look," she whispered. But I looked. I always looked. I saw one of the men pointing in our direction, and something deep in my chest shifted, like a rope being pulled from the inside. We had seen others disappear before, children, women, even old folks. One day they'd be there, the next gone. Sometimes you heard screams, sometimes you didn't hear anything at all. It was just silence, heavy, endless silence. I thought maybe we had more time. Maybe if we hid well enough, or stayed still enough, they wouldn't see us. But hope is a dangerous thing when you've got nothing else. That evening, they came back, my sister, and I had gone behind the big shed, where the trees leaned low and the ground stayed cool. She was humming softly, something she made up on the spot. I was trying to memorize her face, don't ask me why. I just was. Then we heard the steps, heavy, rushed, men's voices, sharp like broken glass. One of them grabbed me by the collar before I could run. I kicked, I screamed, but he didn't even flinch. I looked at her, my sister. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't moving, just staring at me with those wide, terrified eyes. Then another man took her. I saw her mouth open, and that cry, God, that cry is still inside me now. She screamed my name over and over, her little arms flailing, her legs kicking against the wind. I tried to break free, but the man holding me slammed me down so hard I bit my tongue and tasted blood. Quiet, he hissed, but I wasn't quiet. I never forgot that moment, the dust rising around her feet as they dragged her away, the sound of her voice disappearing behind the barn. I reached out. I still see my hand stretched toward her. Useless, empty. That was the last time I saw her. I stayed on the ground for hours after they left. I didn't cry, not at first. I waited, thinking maybe they'd bring her back. Maybe it was some mistake. She was too small, too quiet, too good. But no one came. The world just kept turning like it hadn't even noticed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the place where she dropped her scarf, that little red one she used to tie around her hair. I picked it up, held it to my face, and breathed her in. I whispered her name again and again until my voice gave out. After that, something inside me broke for good. The other children looked at me differently. Some were scared, some just pitied me. None of them asked questions. We all knew the rules don't talk about the ones who disappear. It was like their names became cursed, but I couldn't let her name go. I repeated it in my head every morning. Every night, I carved it into a piece of wood and wore it around my neck. I was afraid that if I stopped saying her name, she'd vanish completely. I couldn't let that happen. The days blurred. I went through them like a ghost. I worked harder, ate less, slept only when my body gave up. But even in sleep, I heard her voice. Sometimes she was calling me. Sometimes she was crying. And sometimes those were the worst. She was quiet, just staring, like that last moment. Before they took her, I tried to make sense of it. I tried to believe there was some reason, but there wasn't. They took her because they could, because no one was watching, because no one cared. That was the truth, and that truth made me sick. I stopped talking to people, stopped laughing, stopped pretending. Everything around me kept moving. New workers came in, others vanished. The sun rose and set, but I stayed frozen in that moment. I kept seeing her running toward me, kept feeling the air between us, thick with something I couldn't fight. I remember trying to pray, though I didn't know how. I asked whoever was out there to bring her back just for a second, just so I could tell her I was sorry, that I should have held on tighter, that I should have screamed louder, but all I got was silence. And that silence has followed me every day since. It sits in my chest like a stone, heavy, cold, permanent. People think pain fades with time, but that's a lie. Pain becomes part of you. It molds your bones, twists your memory, shapes the way you breathe. I grew up with that scream buried inside me, her scream. The way she called my name like I was the only thing in the world. And I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was just a boy, too weak, too small, too scared. But I remember every second. And if I forget, even for a moment, then it's like she never existed. And I won't let that happen. Not while I still have breath. Not while her name still burns in my blood. That night was different. The air felt heavier, the wind colder, and even the silence seemed deeper than usual. My sister and I sat side by side, watching the shadows grow longer, saying very little. Nights were always dangerous, but that one carried a weight we couldn't shake, something unseen, but felt a quiet dread creeping closer. I could feel her breathing next to me, steady but tense, and the stillness between us spoke louder than words. I finally asked if she was afraid. She didn't answer right away, then whispered softly. They looked at me today, that look. She didn't need to say more. I knew what she meant, that cold, piercing look that could strip your soul bare, the kind that marked you forever. My stomach tightened with a knot I'd never felt before, one that stayed locked inside me ever since. I held her hand tightly and told her, maybe more to comfort myself than her, it's going to be okay. She just looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before, eyes that carried the weight of knowing the end was near. The silence deepened around us as she tried to smile, making up a story like she always did when things got hard. She spoke of a place where children ran free, without fear, across open fields under a gentle sun. For a moment, her voice softened. The darkness and the pain faded into a dream. Then the silence returned, heavier than before. She stopped speaking and looked deeply into my eyes as if she could see the fear I was trying to hide. If something happens, she started, but didn't finish. Instead, she gave me a look that said more than words ever could. Promise me you'll remember me. I tried to keep my voice steady, telling her nothing would happen, but inside I was breaking. She pulled a small, colorful cloth from her pocket, the one she'd found months ago and kept like a treasure, calling it her piece of happiness, a charm to protect us. She placed it in my hands and said, "Keep this close, so I'm always near you." I never thought those would be our last words. No one ever believes their last moments will be the last, until it's too late. As the night deepened, sleep escaped. US both, I lay awake, haunted by the things left unsaid and the fear that settled like a shadow over us. When I looked at her one last time, her eyes were closed, but her hand still held mine. Then the footsteps came heavy, relentless. I heard them before I could move. I saw her struggle to hold on, her face etched with pain she tried to hide. The men took her with such ease, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I was frozen, my voice caught in my throat, my body held down like a stone. She called my name as they dragged her away, but the world answered only with silence. I didn't cry then. The emptiness inside me was deeper than any tears. When she was gone, time stopped turning, but it didn't stop moving. I stayed there, helpless, swallowed by a silence I've never escaped. From that moment on, the ache of losing her settled inside me like a permanent wound. The guilt of not screaming louder, of not fighting harder, haunts me still. She asked me to remember. I promised. Every day since, her memory lives inside me. Maybe that promise is what keeps me breathing, that I will never let her fade away. And if you are here, listening now, sharing this pain with me, I ask you quietly, stay with me. Subscribe, not for me, but for her, so her story doesn't disappear into the shadows where no one remembers. She deserves to be remembered. The days that followed were like walking through a fog I could never escape. The world kept turning. The sun rose and set, but I was trapped in a place where time had no meaning. Everyone around me pretended like nothing had happened. The other children, the adults, but I could see the cracks in their eyes, the way their shoulders slumped under invisible burdens. No one spoke of what had been taken, as if silence could erase the pain. I wandered through the fields, my hands scraping the rough bark of the trees, feeling their strength while mine withered away. My sister's laughter was a ghost in my ears, a sound that haunted every quiet moment. I tried to find her in the shapes of clouds, in the whisper of the wind, in every shadow cast by the moonlight, but she was nowhere, and that absence was a constant ache that would not relent. I remember how the nights dragged on endlessly. The stars shone like cold eyes watching my grief, and the darkness pressed in closer every hour. I often found myself curled up beneath the branches of an old oak tree, clutching the worn cloth she had given me, the only piece of her left in my hands. I traced the faded colors with trembling fingers, wishing I could unravel the past and weave a different ending. Sometimes, in the stillness, I heard voices, distant and broken, carrying the names of others who had been taken, lost like her in the unending night. It was a cruel chorus that no child should have to learn. I tried to speak, to shout, into the wind, but my voice was swallowed by the vast emptiness around me. The fear that gripped us was not just of those men, but of being forgotten. Forgotten like shadows on a forgotten path. I realized then that survival was not just about living another day. It was about holding on to the pieces of who we were, even when the world tried to steal them away. I held her memory close, like a fragile flame, guarding it from the storms that threatened to snuff it out. The other children grew quieter around me. Some looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. I was different now, marked by loss, shaped by grief. I walked alone more and more, learning to carry the weight of pain without letting it break me completely. But inside, a storm raged, a fire fueled by sorrow and helplessness. I asked myself why it happened. why they came for her, why no one stopped them. The answers never came, only silence and emptiness. I learned to bury the questions deep inside, to hide the cracks behind the mask of quiet strength. Sometimes I caught glimpses of hope, a kind look from a stranger, a kind word from someone who saw beyond the broken boy. Those moments were rare, but they kept me going. I clung to them like lifelines, fragile but real. Years passed, and the boy I was began to fade into a man shaped by pain and memory. But that night, that last night, never left me. It lived in every shadow, every breath, every heartbeat. It was a wound that never healed, a scar etched deep in my soul. I carry it with me still, and I wonder every day if I will ever find peace, if I will ever be free from the weight of that loss. But maybe peace is not about forgetting. Maybe it is about learning to live with the pain, to let it remind me of what was stolen and what must never be forgotten. The years rolled on like a slow river, carrying me further from the boy I used to be, but never far from the memory of that night. I learned to live with the silence that filled the spaces where my sister's laughter once lived. It was a quiet kind of sorrow that wrapped around my heart like a shadow I could never shake. Each day was a struggle to hold on to what little hope I had left. The men who took her faces I never forgot were ghosts that haunted every corner of my mind. I see their silhouettes in the flicker of firelight, hear their whispers in the wind, and feel their cold eyes watching me from the darkness. I tried to understand why it happened, searching for meaning in a world that offered none. The pain was a constant companion, a wound that never healed but taught me how to endure. Work became my refuge. I labored from dawn until dusk, the ache in my muscles a dull reminder that I was still alive. Sometimes, the rhythm of the work was the only thing that kept my mind from unraveling. But no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the memory always surfaced in dreams that left me gasping for air. In moments when a simple scent or sound would bring her back like she was right there. Beside me, I saw other children grow up around me, some broken, some hardened, some lost in their own silent battles. We shared a bond of grief and fear, but no words could truly connect the depths of what we carried inside. I learned to keep my feelings locked away, sharing only the barest parts of my story with those I trusted. The rest stayed hidden, a secret wound beneath my skin. Sometimes, I wondered if my sister's voice was still out there somewhere, calling to me from beyond the shadows. I imagined her running free in the fields she once dreamed of, laughing under a sun that was kind and warm. But reality would always pull me back to cold ground beneath my feet, the heavy weight on my chest, the loneliness that no dream could erase. I made small promises to myself, fragments of hope to hold onto when the darkness threatened to swallow me whole. I promised to survive, to carry her memory, to never let the world forget what was taken from us. I found moments of kindness in unlikely places, a gentle word from a stranger, the warmth of a fire on a cold night, the quiet companionship of someone who understood loss without needing to speak it aloud. Those moments were rare, but they reminded me that even in the deepest sorrow, there was still a flicker of light. I clung to that light, fragile but real. As the years stretched on, I became a man shaped by pain and resilience, a man who carried the past like a cloak. But inside, the boy who lost his sister never truly left. He was still there in every heartbeat, every tear, every memory that refused to fade. The scars of that night ran deep, and some days the weight felt unbearable. Yet, I kept walking, step by step, through a world that never stopped turning, carrying a story that needed to be told. Because even though the darkness tries to erase us, the memory of those we love is a fire that cannot be extinguished. It burns in the quiet places of the soul, a reminder of what was stolen and what remains forever. The seasons changed, and so did I, though inside, the ache remained the same. I learned to mask my sorrow beneath a quiet exterior, walking through the fields with eyes that saw too much for a boy. My age, the people around me spoke in whispers about freedom and promises, words that felt distant and hollow compared to the weight I carried in my heart. My sister's absence was a silent scream that echoed in every corner of my world. Sometimes, I caught myself imagining what life might have been, what she might have become if the world had been kinder. Would she have laughed like before? Would she have run wild under the sun, free and unafraid? The questions haunted me, but no answers ever came. I watched others live their lives, build families, and dream futures, while I remained tethered to the past, chained by memories that refused to fade. Each morning, I rose with a heaviness that no work or prayer could lift. I toiled under the hot sun, my hands raw and calloused, but my mind trapped in the endless loop of that final night. I would see her face in the flicker of firelight, her eyes pleading for me to remember, her voice a fragile whisper in the darkness. And so I carried her not just in my heart, but in every breath I took, in every step I made toward a life that seemed impossible to build. Sometimes, strangers would offer a kind word or a moment of compassion, small lights in a world full of shadows, but the weight of grief was a constant companion, one that no kindness could erase. I learned to endure the loneliness that came with loss, to live with the silence that filled the space where my sister's laughter used to be. It was a quiet suffering, invisible to most, but as real and painful as any wound. As I grew older, I understood that survival was more than just living. It was about carrying memory, about telling stories so the past would not be forgotten. I found solace in the small things, the warm cloth she gave me, the soft whisper of the wind through the trees, the distant call of birds at dawn. These fragments of hope kept me tethered to something beyond the pain. Yet, the nights remained the hardest. When darkness fell, the memories flooded back with a force that stole my breath. I would lie awake, haunted by the sight of her being taken, by the helplessness that still gripped me. The silence of that night was louder than any scream, and it followed me like a shadow. I often asked myself, what could have been done differently? If there was any way to rewrite that story. But the past is a chain that cannot be broken, and I learned to live with its weight. Now, as a man shaped by loss and resilience, I carry her memory like a flame in the darkest night. It is a light that guides me, a reminder of love and pain intertwined. And though the world keeps moving forward, I remain rooted in the promise I made to remember her, to honor her, and to keep her story alive, no matter how heavy the burden may be. As the years passed, the weight of that night seemed to settle deeper into my bones every day. I walked the earth like a man who had seen too much for a lifetime. The fire in my chest had long since burned down to embers, but the pain, no, that pain never truly went away. It became a part of me, woven into my very soul, like the thread in the tapestry that can never be undone. My hands had grown stronger, my body older, but my heart remained fragile, held together by threads of memory and loss. I had learned to survive, to keep moving through life, even when it felt like the weight of the past would crush me. There were moments when I would sit alone, staring out into the horizon, wondering if I would ever be free of the shadows that haunted me. Sometimes, I thought of the other children, those who had lost their families too, those who had been torn from everything they knew. We shared a bond of grief, but no words could ever truly express the depth of the pain we carried. The world around me kept changing, but it seemed like I was standing still. The things I once dreamed of, freedom, peace, love, felt like distant stars in the sky too far away. I had learned to let go of the hope that things would ever be right again. But then, in the quietest of moments, when the wind whispered through the trees, or when the night sky stretched out before me, like a canvas of endless possibility, I would feel her, my sister. Her presence, faint but still there, in the rustling of the leaves, in the soft hum of life. She had been taken from me, but somehow she was still a part of me. She lived in the memory of her laughter, in the warmth of her touch, in the promise I made to never forget her. I carried that promise with me wherever I went, even when it felt like the world was trying to erase everything that mattered. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fair, but I kept going, for her, for me, for all those who had been forgotten. And as I stand here now, telling you this story, I realized that maybe this is the way it was always meant to be. Maybe the only way to keep something alive is to pass it on, to share it, so that it can live beyond us. My sister's story doesn't end with me. It will live on in every person who hears it, in every person who remembers what was lost. So if you're listening now, if you've heard my words and felt the weight of this story, I ask you, quietly, humbly, stay with me. Stay with my sister, with all those who came before us. Remember what was stolen. Keep their stories alive. Subscribe, not for me, but for those who have no voice left. Stay here, in this space, and continue to listen, to remember, to never forget.